Hello friends, welcome to Houseplant Tips and Tricks. My name is Nick, and today I'm going to show you how to turn one philodendron into 10, maybe even 20. This series is sponsored by repotme.com. Get all of your indoor gardening supplies delivered to your door from one place. Repotme.com has practically anything you need for your orchids, succulents, and houseplants, including handmade potting mixes, planters, fertilizers, and much more. Today's video is going to revolve around a method of propagation that's going to result in a large quantity of plants in the end. However, it's going to require a lot of patience to get there. Just a heads up before we get started. So this is going to involve single node cuttings, if that rings a bell to you. If not, I'm going to explain all of what that is. So you're going to need a plant today, of course. We're going to be using philodendrons. This method is perfectly fine for a lot of vining aroids, which a philodendron, or many philodendrons, are vining aroids. So pothos plants are another one, Syndapsis, Syngoniums, a lot of vining aroids are going to work perfectly fine with this method. So this mess that I have on the table right here is, or once was, but technically still is, my philodendron compost portuanum. I used to have it growing up my trellis in my old home, removed it off of my trellis when I was getting ready to move. It was left at my old apartment for a month, and then by the time I moved it here, it wasn't looking too hot, and I didn't want to put it back up on the trellis. It's been sitting on the floor, and now, unfortunately, it has no leaves on it. But this plant has a bunch of nodes on it, maybe like 20 nodes on it, so we have a lot to work with. A node is the part of the plant where the leaf is going to come off of. This is the petiole that was holding onto the leaf, and then this main part right here is the stem. Each little part or notch on the plant that has these little rootlets coming off of it, and there is a straight up notch in the stem, and like I said before, where the leaf will be coming out, this is what you need. You need at least one of these for each single node cutting. The space in between these nodes is called the internode. We really don't need much of that at all. That's just more likely to rot than not. So we're going to end up cutting this into a bunch of pieces. Normally when you take plant cuttings, or of a philodendron in particular, you're going to take a cutting that looks a little bit more like this, where it has a bunch of leaves on it still, and maybe you have a couple nodes down here for it to be submerged into water or sphagnum moss, soil, whatever method of propagation you're going to be doing. And this is going to be a little bit different than that. This is more of a rescue situation, so like this plant I have right here, or maybe even this philodendron right here, which this is a philodendron pink princess, which I took this cutting off of one of my philodendrons that just isn't looking so hot and has a bunch of bare nodes on it. So perfectly fine with this too. In fact, I can maybe even save the top here and then use a bunch of these nodes. We will cross that bridge when we get there. So to get started with this, what are we going to need? Of course, like I said, you're going to need a philodendron. You're also going to need some sphagnum moss. We're going to use some sphagnum moss from repotme.com. I'm going to leave a link in the description below for where you can purchase this, and if you make any purchases of this item or any other purchases on repotme.com through the link in my description, I will get a commission, so thank you so much. But we're going to use this sphagnum moss as our potting medium today. We're also going to need a vessel, and we're not going to use a normal planter or a plastic planter. Today I'm actually going to use a takeout container, a plastic takeout container, cleaned, of course, or new, whatever you have on hand. A Tupperware is fine, anything clear, but more specifically with a clear lid. That's the most important part. It doesn't matter if the side of it is clear or not clear, not a big deal. And last but not least, we are going to need some pruning shears. I have some pruning shears from repotme.com. Once again, will be linked in the description below, that I have sanitized, as it's always best to sanitize your shears between uses, between plants, with some rubbing alcohol. Just to be prepared, a little mise en place, we're going to get our sphagnum moss ready, opening this brand new bag. It's dry coming straight out of the bag, but I'm going to put some of it inside our takeout container or Tupperware or whatever you're using. You could even use a plastic planter if that's all you have on hand with some sphagnum moss, and then just put it inside a plastic bag, like a Ziploc bag, to recreate the kind of like greenhouse conditions we're gonna be having by closing this in here with the plastic lid. So I'm just gonna get an appropriate amount inside, and then I'm just going to go to the sink and moisten this up. You could have even pre-dampened your sphagnum moss beforehand. There we go, our moss is moist, damp, not wet, not soaking wet. I squeezed it out completely because, you know, rot can be an issue and moisture is the cause of that, but we of course need moisture for our plant to be able to grow. So now we're going to start taking single node cuttings of our plant. In fact, I might, just like I was saying, how I have the tip of the pink princess right here, like this is a bunch of leaves ready to go, how we would normally take a cutting. I might just take a cutting right here with this up to where this little pieces right here and stick this in water. Hopefully this growth tip will activate and produce some new leaves as it begins to root, as we do have some good aerial roots at the base here. So we'll just place this aside for now, not part of our project that we're doing today. So we're gonna start to take a bunch of single node cuttings. So you can see right at the tip here, I have a node right below my cut, and about a centimeter below that node, I'm going to cut once more. Onto the table she goes, and we have a single node cutting. So it's basically just a node with roughly a centimeter or so of internode around it, just to be sure that we're not cutting too close to the node, which could damage it and then render it useless. So now I have a bunch of this internode left. So let's go down to just a centimeter above this node here, remove this bit of internode here. This is useless, this is garbage, it's not going to do anything, or it's compost, it's not necessarily garbage, but it's not going to do anything. Unfortunately, if there is no node on the plant, there is no way for it to grow, unless we're talking like tissue culture or something. But once again, going roughly a centimeter below this node here, going to let it fall on the table into our little pile, and we're going to continue centimeter down, joins our good pile, joins our trash pile, and that's all you really have to do. Now, if there were leaves on this plant, that's not a big deal. Like if you had a long vine like this and you really wanted to turn this one vine into a bunch of new plants, and maybe you're a little bit more of an attentive plant parent than me and you have leaves on the entire thing, that's perfectly fine. However, the downside of that is, in order to fit them into a container like this, or many of the containers that you'll be propagating in, you're likely going to have to remove the leaves. Particularly when you're working with philodendrons like this, which have leaves that are on the larger side. It's going to be hard to work them into a container. If there's a will, there's a way. I'm sure it's possible. I'm sure there's a container out there that it would work with, but when I do this at home, I just remove the leaves. Also just to save the energy, because you don't really need that one leaf if it's just gonna grow a bunch of new leaves in the end, if it's going to become a whole new plant instead of just one little piece of one plant. And like I said, this does take a lot of patience, but in the end, it feels really nice when you turn this one just spindly vine, which was just one couple leaves when I first started, and I had the joy of growing it out to what was once a nice looking vining plant, now just a leafless stem. But it's gonna feel so much better when I turn this into a nice, large, full plant with a bunch of plants in it, at least 10. And then over time, with good care, all 10 of those plants can eventually look like this did at one point. So that's where the patience part really comes in, but all of these plants are gonna follow that old adage I always say: the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, the third year they leap, but these are kind of pre-sleeping at the moment. They haven't really even gotten to their sleeping stage yet. These are prenatal. All right, I think we've got a lot of cuttings here, at least 10 to 15, so we'll put this one to the side for the moment. And you know what, while we're at it, I took that little cutting of this pink princess philodendron, and it does have a bunch of these nodes on it. They are pretty tight together, so it's not as easy to take a clean cutting, so I might be damaging one node, so maybe I'll include 2 nodes on this. Basically a single node, you know what I mean? Just gives it a little bit more chance, which, you know, if you are working with plants, maybe like a pink princess or something else that might be a little bit more valuable, then maybe do 2 nodes on each cutting if you're working with more of it, just to ensure that it's going to have some success to it. I usually have a really good success rate when I'm doing these single node cuttings. It's just that not 100% of them are going to work every single time. That's just the way it is. There we go. We'll save these leaves, even though they're looking a little wimpy, for the water propagation. And then we're gonna go ahead and take our container here and start to get our cuttings that we have. I guess I'll start with a couple of these pink princesses. And we're going to put them node side down. So the part that the little root is, you can see, hopefully, you can see there's this root nub coming off of my right side here. So we're going to put that straight down into the soil, or the medium that I have here, the sphagnum moss. And that's going to encourage that root to work into the sphagnum moss just the same way if you were having a philodendron climb up a sphagnum moss pole and you have those nodes up against the pole and you're like tying them to the pole and keeping it moist, and they're going to work their way into that moss eventually and start to grow, and eventually you could cut it off and grow a new plant right from there. It's basically the same exact physics, biology, chemistry, I don't know the word. It's the same science. Let's take these couple other of pink princess. You can see right here and right here. This is the bottom side here where we'll be sticking it down into the soil for it to root up, or the moss. I keep calling it the soil, and I'm probably going to continue to do so. And I want to give these nodes a little bit of room inside here. They don't need a ton of space. We're not going to let them root up for that long, but about 1 inch of clearance on all sides is going to be probably best. So let's move on to all these little Philodendron Campos Portoanum single node cuttings you can see on this one right here. There is a root, little aerial root coming off there, which is guiding us in the direction that we should be placing it inside. So we're going to place it down into the moss with the root in contact with the moss. Easy peasy. We're going to do that for the rest of these. And if you're having a hard time finding which side to place down into the soil, if there isn't any visible root nubs, just place them in the soil where the petiole is sticking upwards, or where that little stem that attaches to the leaf originally before you removed it, or before it was on there, in case you're in my situation, before it fell off. When in doubt, just place that part up. A lot of the time, I find that the roots emerge from the opposite side of where that's going on. So just a little tip there, I guess. And while I'm just laying them like this, I know some people like to stick them down into the sphagnum moss, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You're gonna find success with that too. The only issue I have is I have a hard time remembering which way's up and which way's down, and that's a little bit more important if you're gonna be sticking inside the sphagnum moss. So just to avoid any confusion there, that's why I just like to simply lay them on top of the sphagnum moss. Now we have all of our cuttings inside here. We have 18 cuttings of the Philodendron Campos Portoanum, and there were a couple more that I could have taken, so I could have gotten at least 20 off of that guy. A couple Pink Princess Philodendron cuttings as well that are getting ready to get started in here. All we're gonna do is close the lid. We might open it every once in a while, like once a week, just to let it air out a little bit, make sure that the moss is still moist, or make sure that it's not too moist, and make sure that there's no rot going on, because, you know, there's always one or two that ends up just not liking the situation that you gotta pull out before it causes mold and more problems than not. But we're going to put this somewhere well lit, maybe underneath one of my grow lights, one of my grow light shelves, or near a brightly lit window. Not in the window, it might kind of fry a little bit. And we are just going to do what we do best, be very patient and wait. But fortunately, in a Food Network type fashion, I do have another one right here that I started a couple months ago. I don't know how long it's been at this point. It's been very active, I can put it that way. So active that the sphagnum moss has even really picked up a life of its own, as you can see inside here. It's pretty cool. So this is some Philodendron Itabapoense cuttings that I took a while back. I had a rogue vine that was just producing some leaves I wasn't very happy with, but of course the stem is perfectly viable. So I did exactly the method I just showed you guys today, just a couple months ago, and this is what we are left with. So let's pull one out so we can see what we got. So here we have a nice little Philodendron Itabapoense cutting. Of course, it's just teeny tiny. It's still sitting inside this sphagnum moss, trapped inside this container with not a lot of room for its roots to grow. So it's time to pull some of these out and plant them in a little planter so they can start to get at least a little bit bigger, because these leaves are teeny tiny. They're looking just like a little plant started from tissue culture or something you would have gotten in a plug if you're working in the greenhouse before you're planting it up for it to grow into the lovely monstrous plant that is ready to be sold for you in a 4-inch pot or a 6-inch pot or however much. I have a little planter today from repotme.com, one of these little Amphora vases, and we're gonna have to make a little bit of soil. Repotme.com does have a philodendron mix ready to go right out of the bag called the Imperial Philodendron Mix, which I will leave linked in the description below. And you can use code NICK to save 10% on any potting mix from repotme.com. You do still have to click through the link if you would like to give me any commission. However, today we are going to make our own philodendron potting mix off of ingredients you might have on hand or that you can also get from repotme.com. So today I'm going to use a couple scoops of the classic houseplant and tropical mix. This is a coconut coir-based mixture, which is much better for your plants than a peat moss-based mixture, which is what many of the mixtures that you're going to find at your big box stores are going to have. Plus, peat moss is way less sustainable for the earth, so highly recommend going the extra mile and using a coconut coir-based mix. So we got 2 scoops of that in our little container here. I have some perlite, puffed volcanic rock. Pumice is perfectly fine too. Let's do 1 scoop of that. And then I also have some orchid bark. I'm using some extra fine bark. This is Monterey bark, extra fine from repotme.com. Once again, will be linked in my description below. However, you can use whatever you have on hand. I just really prefer the extra fine bark, and I have a really hard time finding it, except repotme.com has a really excellent selection of orchid barks in all different sizes. Just using my finger to mix it because, well, why not? It's not very much soil that we need. Let's pull out like maybe 1 or 2 more of these little philodendrons. We gotta get them out of here sooner than later anyway. All right, I got 4 little plantlets out of there just because, you know, it's not a very big container. We don't want to overdo it. So let's get a little scoop in there of our nice aroid mix, philodendron mix ready to go. Let's start to just get an idea of how these might look. Oh my God, it's gonna look so fun. Just chock full of little baby philodendron atopoense, especially since these are so young at the moment. They don't even really have the characteristics of an atopoense, so people won't even realize that this is such a fun philodendron just stuffed in this tiny little planter here. It's so unexpected. Start to nestle them in there where we see fit. I'm almost thinking about maybe just pulling out 1 or 2 more. Like I said, these are pretty young. They haven't really had the space for their roots to grow. And of course, this isn't that much space, as this is just a roughly 2.5, 3-inch planter. But they have a lot more space vertically inside here for their roots to grow, which they do not have inside this container here, which is kind of the point, to get them focusing on producing and not necessarily growing to their fullest extent until they're outside the container, have an adequate little root system going, and also just have a couple of leaves on them. But I'm like, why not? Let's just shove them all in here. They have really, really small roots, as you can see. Still good root systems for what we have going on, but just still a very, very young plant. So let's get them all in here. A hot tip I have for this, though, is I might consider throwing this inside a Ziploc bag for probably just about a week, since these have been growing inside this much more humid environment for the entirety of their lives. And now I'm not only ripping them out of their home, putting them inside a new potting medium for them to grow. So, you know, might as well keep at least one thing the same. So we should try to keep that humidity high. Fill this up with a little bit more soil just to keep everything in place. And she's looking so cute. Of course, like I was saying, I'm kind of just doing this for aesthetics. These philodendrons are not going to last that long inside this tiny little container here. I'd say by the springtime, when the growing season starts, these are going to have to get moved to like a 4 to 6 inch container, probably separated into 2 of those containers for them to grow to their fullest potential. But it all requires me to make sure I am caring for these correctly before we even go to that stage. Let's grab a little Ziploc bag. And let's place her inside. The plastic just kind of ruins it, but you know, she would look a lot worse if she was dead. So this will keep her looking up to snuff for the next week or so. Then we can open the Ziploc bag maybe for a couple of days, keep it just kind of cracked so the humidity's still high. And then after a couple more days, maybe 2 weeks maximum, remove the whole thing. And we have a new plant. It's so cute. Just all these leaves, tiny little atopoense leaves shoved together. It's gonna take some time, like I said, for them to grow and mature and get looking like an adult atopoense would. But I think within the year, that is very attainable. So I think that's gonna do it for today's project, turning 1 philodendron into 10, 20, 30, however many nodes you have is however many philodendrons you might just end up with. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you again for repotme.com for sponsoring this series and today's video. As I mentioned, I will leave all of the products I used or talked about in today's video linked in the description below. And if you click through those links, I do get a small commission, and you can use code NICK to save 10% on any potting mix from repotme.com. So thank you so much again for joining me. If you don't already, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at phillyfoliage. Subscribe to my Patreon if you'd like to support me a little bit more. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day.